They had watched Earth for nearly 50 years before they decided to make contact. Their observation drones had circled the blue planet in silence, recording everything. They watched the humans build cities and tear them down. They watched them fight wars and make peace. They watched them launch primitive rockets into space and cheer like children when they succeeded. And after 50 years of careful study, they came to a simple conclusion. Humans were weak. Ambassador Al stood at the viewing port of the diplomatic cruiser as it descended through Earth's atmosphere. He was tall even by standards, his blue carapace gleaming under the artificial lights of the ship. His compound eyes studied the landscape below with a mixture of curiosity and disappointment. The planet was beautiful, he had to admit. Blue oceans, green forests, white clouds drifting across vast continents. But the creatures who lived here were nothing special. The biological reports had been clear. Humans had no natural armor. Their skin was soft and easily punctured. They had no claws, no fangs worth mentioning, no venom glands, no ability to regenerate lost limbs. They could not see in the dark without assistance. They could not hear frequencies that most species considered basic. They required a constant supply of oxygen and water just to survive. A child could crush a human adult with minimal effort. Al turned to his aide, a younger named In who was making his first diplomatic mission. The ambassador gestured toward the planet below with one of his four arms. He told In to look carefully at this world because it was a perfect example of how a species could evolve without any real advantages. He explained that the humans had somehow managed to become the dominant life form on their planet despite having no biological weapons whatsoever. It was almost impressive in a sad sort of way. In asked how they had managed to survive at all. Al made a clicking sound that served as a laugh. He said the humans used tools. They could not fight with their bodies, so they built machines to fight for them. They could not run fast, so they built vehicles. They could not fly, so they built aircraft. Everything about their civilization was compensation for their natural weakness. The ambassador shook his head slowly and added that it was clever but ultimately fragile. Take away their tools and they were just soft meat waiting to be eaten. The ship landed in a cleared field outside a human city. Al had chosen the location carefully. He wanted to meet the humans on neutral ground, away from their buildings and machines. He wanted to see them as they truly were. The human delegation was already waiting when they emerged from their ship. There were 6 of them standing in a neat row. They wore matching uniforms of dark blue and their faces showed no fear, only polite curiosity. Al studied them with growing disdain. They were even smaller than the reports had suggested. The tallest among them barely reached his chest. Their limbs were thin and their bodies looked like they would break at the slightest impact. A woman stepped forward from the human group. She had brown hair pulled back from her face and eyes the color of Earth's sky. She introduced herself as Lieutenant Commander Kate and welcomed the delegation to Earth on behalf of the United Earth government. Her voice was calm and steady. She showed no sign of being intimidated by the aliens towering over her. Al found this mildly amusing. The human was pretending to be brave. It was a common behavior among weak species. They puffed themselves up and acted confident because showing fear would mark them as prey. But Al could see through the act. He could see the pulse beating in her throat, the slight tension in her shoulders. She was afraid. She was just hiding it well. He introduced himself and his delegation. He explained that they had been watching Earth for many years and had decided that humanity was ready to join the Galactic Assembly. This was presented as a great honor, though Al's tone suggested otherwise. He went on to explain the structure of the assembly, the thousands of species that had joined together for mutual benefit and protection. He described the trade networks, the shared technology, the collective defense agreements. Kate listened carefully to everything he said. She asked appropriate questions. She thanked him for the opportunity. But Al noticed something in her eyes that he could not quite identify. It was not fear. It was not gratitude. It was something else entirely. When Al explained the classification system, Kate's expression did not change. The assembly sorted species into categories based on their biological capabilities. There were apex species at the top, beings with natural weapons and defenses that made them formidable in any conflict. Below them were the standard species, capable of defending themselves but not dominant. And at the bottom were the protected species, beings deemed too weak to survive without assistance from stronger allies. Al told Kate that humanity would be classified as a protected species. He said this was meant as a kindness. The galaxy was dangerous, and humans were not equipped to face those dangers alone. Under protected status, humanity would be shielded by stronger species. They would be kept safe from predators and raiders. They would be allowed to develop at their own pace without the pressures of conflict. Kate thanked him for the consideration. She said humanity was honored to accept the classification. Al was pleased. He had expected the humans to argue, to protest their status, to make foolish claims about their own strength. Most weak species did exactly that. They refused to accept their limitations until those limitations killed them. But the humans were being sensible. They understood their place in the natural order. What Al did not understand was the look that passed between Kate and the other humans in her delegation. It was a look of quiet amusement, almost like they were sharing a private joke. He dismissed it as nervousness. Weak species often laughed when they were uncomfortable. He had no way of knowing that Kate had served 3 combat tours before joining the diplomatic corps. He had no way of knowing that every human in that delegation had training that they could not even imagine. He had no way of knowing that humanity had spent its entire existence fighting against impossible odds and winning. They saw soft skin and small bodies. They saw a species without claws or armor. They saw weakness. They did not see the fire burning behind human eyes. They did not see the centuries of warfare that had forged humanity into something the galaxy had never encountered. They did not see the simple truth that every human learned from childhood. The universe was hostile, life was struggle, and humans had been struggling since the first of their ancestors stood upright on the African plains and decided that they would not be prey. Kate smiled politely as Al outlined the terms of humanity's membership in the assembly. She nodded at all the right moments. She asked questions that made her seem naive and grateful. And she waited. Humanity had learned long ago that proving yourself with words was meaningless. Actions were the only language that mattered. They would learn this lesson eventually. Every species that underestimated humans learned it eventually. Kate just hoped she would be there to see it when they did. 6 months passed after humanity joined the Galactic Assembly. In that time, the humans had been quiet and cooperative. They accepted their protected status without complaint. They followed every rule and regulation. They sent their representatives to assembly meetings where they sat in the back and listened politely. The other species barely noticed them. Humans were small and soft and unimportant. There were far more interesting things to pay attention to. The assembly assigned humanity to Outpost 17, a mining station on the outer edge of civilized space. It was considered safe work for a protected species. The station orbited a mineral-rich asteroid, extracting valuable metals that were shipped back to the core worlds. There was no conflict in the region, no threats, no danger. It was the perfect place to put a species that could not defend itself. Staff Sergeant Danny Reeves arrived at Outpost 17 with 11 other humans. They were officially designated as a security support team, which meant they were expected to handle minor issues like cargo disputes and lost equipment. The real security was provided by a contingent of guards, 20 trained soldiers with energy weapons and light armor. The humans were just there to fill a quota. Danny was a lean man in his early 30s with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. He had served in the military since he was 18 years old. He had fought in 3 different conflicts on Earth before they arrived. He had scars on his body that told stories he rarely shared. But none of that mattered to the aliens. To them, he was just another fragile human who needed to be kept away from anything dangerous. Chief Administrator Ara ran Outpost 17 with cold efficiency. She was a senior with decades of experience managing remote installations. Her carapace had faded to a pale blue with age, but her mind was still sharp. She reviewed the human security team's files when they arrived and dismissed them almost immediately. Their combat records meant nothing to her. Humans fighting humans was not impressive. It was like watching insects battle over crumbs. She assigned Danny's team to patrol the cargo bays and residential quarters. They would check identification badges, monitor surveillance feeds, and report any unusual activity to the guards. It was simple work, safe work, work that even a protected species could handle without getting hurt. Danny accepted the assignment without argument. He gathered his team in their cramped quarters that first night and spoke to them quietly. He told them to learn the station, every corridor, every access point, every ventilation shaft. He told them to study the other species, to understand how they moved and how they thought. He told them to stay ready because the galaxy was dangerous and situations could change without warning. Corporal Amy asked if he really thought something would happen. She was young, barely 25, but she had sharp instincts and faster reflexes than anyone Danny had ever served with. She had grown up in a military family and had been training for combat since she could walk. Danny said he hoped nothing would happen, but hope was not a strategy. Preparation was a strategy, and humans had survived this long by being prepared for the worst. The weeks passed quietly. The humans did their patrols. They smiled politely at the guards who looked at them with barely concealed contempt. They learned the station exactly as Danny had ordered. Amy memorized every blind spot in the security system. A soldier named Pete Grant mapped every possible defensive position in the main corridors. Another named Lisa studied the station's power grid until she could shut down any section in seconds. The other species on the station ignored the humans almost completely. There were engineers, a reptilian species known for their technical skills. There were traders, small furry beings who handled the station's commerce. There were workers and administrators and technicians from a dozen different worlds. None of them thought the humans were worth their attention. Ara called weekly briefings to discuss station operations. The guards stood at attention while she spoke. The humans sat in the back and took notes. She never asked for their input. She never acknowledged their presence except to remind them of their patrol schedules. 3 weeks into their assignment, the sensors detected incoming ships. The station's communication officer, a nervous named, announced the contact during a routine shift change. His voice crackled over the intercom with rising panic. He said the ships did not match any registered vessel in the assembly database. He said they were moving fast and not responding to communication attempts. Ara took command immediately. She ordered to keep trying to establish contact. She ordered the guards to defensive positions. She ordered all non-combat personnel to the emergency shelters. Her compound eyes flickered with something Danny recognized instantly: fear. He approached her station and asked what they were facing. Ara looked at him like he had spoken out of turn. She told him to take his team to the shelters with the other civilians. Danny did not move. He asked again, what were they facing? The administrator's mandibles clicked with irritation. She said the ships matched the configuration of raiders. Then she told him again to get to the shelters. Danny knew them by reputation. Every species in the galaxy knew them. They were nomadic predators who struck without warning, took what they wanted, and vanished into the void. They stood nearly 8 feet tall with thick hide that could absorb energy weapons fire. They had 4 arms ending in claws that could tear through metal. The assembly had lost thousands of soldiers trying to contain them. Most species simply fled when appeared. Fighting them was considered suicide. Danny turned to his team. They were already on their feet, checking their weapons, their faces showing no fear. He told Amy to take half the team and secure the residential section evacuation. He told Pete to take the others and lock down the cargo bays. He said they would make their stand at the central hub. Ara stared at him. She said that was impossible. She said the central hub was where they would breach first. She said his team would be slaughtered. Danny looked at her with those calm gray eyes. He said his team would hold the central hub until the evacuation was complete. He said the guards should fall back to secondary positions and protect the civilians. The administrator's voice rose with disbelief. She asked if he understood what were. She said a single could kill a dozen humans without effort. She said he was throwing away the lives of his people for nothing. Danny checked his rifle. He made sure the magazine was full and the safety was off. He looked at Ara one more time and spoke with absolute certainty. He said she had never seen a human in battle. He said nobody in this galaxy had. He said they were about to learn something that the Assembly had failed to understand. Humans were not protected because they were weak. Humans were protected because the Assembly had made an assumption based on biology alone, and that assumption was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. The proximity alarms screamed. The ships had docked. The boarders were coming. Danny gathered his team at the central hub. 12 humans against an unknown number of the most feared raiders in the galaxy. The odds were impossible. But humans had been facing impossible odds since the dawn of their species. And they were still here. The first explosion ripped through the cargo bay airlock at exactly 1400 hours station time. The blast sent shrapnel screaming through the corridor and killed 2 engineers who had not reached the shelters in time. Before the smoke had cleared, they were already pouring through the breach. They were everything the reports had described and worse. Each raider stood nearly 8 feet tall with dark gray hide that looked like stone. Their forearms moved independently, 2 holding massive energy cannons while the other 2 flexed claws that could slice through steel. Their faces were nightmares of teeth and small black eyes that showed no mercy. They roared as they charged, a sound that shook the walls and turned the blood of every species on the station to ice. 20 raiders came through in the first wave. They moved with terrifying speed for creatures so large, their heavy feet pounding against the metal floor as they swept through the cargo bay. The guards opened fire from their defensive positions, blue energy bolts streaking through the air and striking the massive invaders. They barely slowed down. Their hide absorbed the energy fire like it was nothing. Bolt after bolt hit them and they kept coming, their roars mixing with the screams of the soldiers who realized too late that their weapons were nearly useless. The defensive line collapsed in less than 3 minutes. The guards who survived scattered, fleeing toward the secondary positions that Danny had told them to hold. The raiders did not chase them. They had bigger prey in mind. The station's central hub contained the main computer systems, the life support controls, and the communication array. Taking the hub meant taking the station. They knew this. Every raider in the galaxy knew this. They charged toward the central hub, expecting easy victory. They expected to find cowering civilians or perhaps a few foolish guards making a last stand. What they found instead was something none of them had ever encountered. 12 humans stood in a tight formation behind a barricade of cargo containers. They did not run. They did not scream. They simply waited in silence, their weapons raised, their eyes fixed on the approaching monsters. The lead, a veteran named An, slowed his charge for just a moment. His small black eyes studied the tiny creatures blocking his path. He had raided hundreds of stations across dozens of systems. He had killed members of almost every species in the assembly, but he had never seen beings like these before. They were so small, so soft, so utterly without natural weapons. He made a sound that might have been laughter. He told his raiders that the station had sent children to fight them. He said to kill them quickly and move on. They charged. Danny Reeves gave a single command. He said now. 12 rifles fired in perfect unison. But unlike the guards, the humans did not aim for center mass. They had studied biology in the days before the attack. They knew that the thick hide was nearly impervious to standard weapons, but they also knew that no creature was armored everywhere. The first shot struck the lead raiders in their joints, where the hide was thinner and the flesh beneath was vulnerable. Others hit them in the eyes, destroying their vision in bursts of dark blood. Still others found the soft tissue beneath their arms, where major blood vessels ran close to the surface. 3 dropped in the first volley. They had never been wounded like this before. They had never faced prey that knew exactly where to hurt them. The charge faltered. The raiders stumbled over their fallen comrades, confusion replacing their confidence. These tiny creatures were not running. These tiny creatures were fighting back, and they were fighting back effectively. Amy moved before Danny gave the order. She was small and fast, and she used both advantages without hesitation. While they were still trying to understand what was happening, she slipped through a gap in the barricade and flanked the nearest raider. He was twice her height and probably 10 times her weight. He had claws that could cut her in half with a single swipe. She shot him 3 times in the throat before he even saw her. He collapsed with a gurgling roar, his massive body crashing to the floor as dark blood pooled beneath him. The battle dissolved into chaos. They abandoned their formation and attacked individually, their rage overcoming their tactics. They swiped at the humans with those terrible claws. They fired their energy cannons at point-blank range. They used their superior size and strength to try to overwhelm the tiny defenders. But humans did not fight like other species. Pete Grant took a claw strike across his back that opened his flesh to the bone. He did not fall. He turned and emptied his magazine into his attacker's face, then drew his sidearm and kept firing until the creature stopped moving. Only then did he allow himself to drop to one knee, his breath coming in ragged gasps as blood soaked through his uniform. Lisa was thrown against a wall so hard that the impact cracked 2 of her ribs. She rolled to her feet before they could finish her, grabbed a fallen rifle, and shot the creature through the eye at a range of less than 3 feet. The recoil nearly knocked her down again, but she stayed upright through sheer will. Danny fought in the center of the barricade where the fighting was thickest. Caught him with a backhand blow that sent him spinning through the air. He felt ribs crack. He felt pain explode through his entire body. He hit the ground hard and tasted blood in his mouth. They loomed over him, raising one massive foot to crush his skull. Danny drove his combat knife into the creature's ankle, severing the tendon. They screamed and stumbled. Danny was on his feet before it could recover, jamming his sidearm under its jaw and pulling the trigger until the magazine was empty. The humans should have broken. Any other protected species would have fled long ago, but humans did not measure pain the way other species did. To humans, pain was just information. It told you that you were still alive. It told you that you could still fight. And as long as you could still fight, you did not stop. The battle lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, 18 raiders lay dead in the central hub. The walls were scorched with weapons fire. The floor was slick with blood from multiple species. The air smelled like smoke and death. Of the 12 humans who had held the line, 3 were dead. 5 others were wounded badly enough that they could not stand without help. Only 4 remained on their feet, and even they were bleeding from multiple wounds. But they had held. Against impossible odds, against creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for generations, 12 humans had held their ground and won. Danny sat against the barricade, one hand pressed against his broken ribs. His vision was blurry from blood loss and pain, but he was alive. His people had done the impossible. And somewhere in the corridors of Outpost 17, the survivors of every other species were watching their security feeds in stunned silence, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The emergency shelters opened slowly. The locks disengaged one by one, and the heavy doors slid apart to reveal the huddled masses inside. Hundreds of beings from a dozen different species had spent the last hour listening to the sounds of battle echo through the station. They had heard the weapons fire, the explosions, the terrible roars of the raiders. They had expected to die. Now they emerged into a station that was somehow still standing. Chief Administrator Ara was among the first to leave the shelter. Her compound eyes scanned the corridor ahead, searching for threats that were no longer there. The guards who had retreated earlier followed close behind her, their weapons ready but their movements hesitant. They had failed to hold their positions. They had run while others stood and fought. The shame of it hung over them like a cloud. The group moved through the station in tense silence until they reached the central hub. What they found there stopped them in their tracks. The hub was a ruin. Cargo containers had been torn apart by weapons fire. The walls were pocked with blast marks and splattered with blood. Bodies lay everywhere, massive gray forms that had once been the most feared raiders in the galaxy. 18 monsters who had terrorized dozens of worlds, all of them dead. And in the middle of the carnage sat Danny Reeves. He was leaning against an overturned container with his legs stretched out in front of him. His uniform was soaked with blood, some of it his own and some of it not. One hand pressed a torn piece of cloth against a wound in his side, while the other still held his rifle. His face was pale and his breathing was shallow, but his eyes were open and aware. The other surviving humans were scattered around him. Amy was helping Pete Grant wrap a bandage around his shredded back. Lisa sat against a wall with her eyes closed, her broken ribs making every breath an exercise in agony. The others tended to their wounds in silence, too exhausted to speak. Ara walked through the bodies of the fallen. Her mind could not process what she was seeing. These creatures had destroyed assembly war fleets. They had conquered fortified military installations. They had killed thousands of trained soldiers from species far more powerful than humans. And 12 soft, fragile, protected humans had stopped them. She reached Danny and stood over him for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. She asked how this was possible. Danny looked up at her with tired eyes. He told her that humans were not what the assembly thought they were. He said humans were not born with armor, so they learned to find weak points in others. He said humans were not born with claws, so they built weapons. He said humans felt pain just like everyone else, but they had learned to keep fighting anyway because stopping meant dying. Ara's mandibles clicked with confusion. She said the biological reports were clear. Humans were one of the weakest species ever documented. They had no natural advantages whatsoever. Danny almost smiled. He said that was exactly right. He said humans had no natural advantages. Every other species in the galaxy evolved with something that helped them survive. Claws or armor or speed or venom. Humans had none of that. They had soft skin and blunt teeth and bodies that broke easily, so they had to become something else. They had to become adaptable. They had to become persistent. They had to become the kind of creature that would not stop no matter what. He coughed and winced at the pain in his ribs. He told Ara that humans had a word for it: endurance. Other species were built to win fights quickly with superior biology. Humans were built to outlast anything the universe threw at them. They could take damage that would kill most beings and keep going. They could push through pain and exhaustion and fear until they either won or died. There was no surrender in their nature. There was no give up. Before Ara could respond, the communication system crackled to life. A deep, rumbling voice filled the hub. It spoke in rough but understandable assembly common. It demanded to know who had led the defense. The surviving had retreated to their ship, but they had not left. Their leader wanted answers. Danny struggled to his feet despite the protests of his wounded body. Amy moved to help him, but he waved her off. He limped to the communication terminal and activated the visual feed. The face that appeared on screen was terrible. The leader was even larger than the raiders who had died in the hub. His hide was covered with scars from countless battles. One of his 4 eyes had been replaced with a mechanical implant that glowed red in the dim light of his ship. This was the commander of the raiding party, a warrior who had personally killed more beings than most species could count. His remaining eyes studied Danny. with an intensity that would have made lesser beings faint, and asked what Danny was. His voice held something that sounded almost like respect. Danny told him he was human, and said humans were listed as a protected species, weak, no threat. He said the assembly classified them as prey. Danny met the alien's gaze without flinching. He said the assembly made a mistake. There was a long pause, and his face showed no emotion, but something was happening behind those dark eyes. He was reassessing. He was recalculating. He was doing something that almost never did when facing weaker species. He was showing respect, and finally spoke again. He said his raiders would not attack this station again. He said Danny and his humans had earned that much, but he told Danny to deliver a message to the assembly. He said they and the others were fools. He said they had made a terrible error when they classified humanity. He said the galaxy would learn to fear the soft little creatures from the small blue world. Danny asked why it would warn them, and made a sound that might have been a laugh. He said respected strength. He said they had never seen a protected species fight the way humans fought. He said his raiders had killed thousands of assembly soldiers over the years, and none of them had ever stood their ground like this. The leader leaned closer to the screen. He said he had looked into Danny's eyes during the battle. He said he had seen something there that he had never seen in prey species before. He said he had seen the look of a predator. The transmission ended. The ships powered up their engines and disappeared into the darkness of space. In the ruined central hub of Outpost 17, Ara stood in silence, her entire understanding of the universe slowly crumbling around her. The protected species had become something else entirely, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours of the attack on Outpost 17, every species in the assembly was talking about what had happened. The story was almost impossible to believe. A protected species had driven off raiders. 12 soft, fragile humans had held a position against 20 of the most feared warriors in known space. They had killed 18 of them and sent the survivors running. The security footage was transmitted to assembly headquarters within a day. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered in the Great Chamber to watch it. They saw the breach the cargo bay. They saw the guards scatter and flee. They saw 12 small figures take up positions in the central hub, their faces calm, their weapons ready. And then they saw the battle. They watched Amy move through the chaos like water, placing shots with impossible precision. They watched Pete Grant take a wound that should have killed him instantly and keep fighting. They watched Lisa shatter her ribs against a wall and refuse to fall. They watched Danny Reeves get knocked down again and again and get back up every single time until his enemy was dead. The chamber fell silent when the footage ended. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the questions began. How was this possible? How had the classification been so wrong? What were these creatures really? Ambassador Al requested an immediate meeting with the human delegation. His demand was granted within the hour. The Great Chamber was cleared of all other species, and the delegation took their places at one end of the long diplomatic table. Kate entered from the other side. She was not alone. Danny Reeves walked beside her, his wounds wrapped in bandages, his broken ribs held together with medical tape and painkillers. Amy followed close behind, along with the other survivors of Outpost 17. They had refused to stay in the medical bay. They had insisted on being present for this. Al studied them as they took their seats. His compound eyes moved from face to face, searching for something he had missed in their first meeting 6 months ago. The humans looked exactly the same as before. Small bodies, soft skin, no natural weapons. Nothing had changed about their biology. But something had changed in the way Al saw them. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. He said they had evaluated humanity based on biological metrics, body mass, natural defenses, combat capabilities. By every standard the assembly used, Humans should have been among the weakest beings in the galaxy. Kate nodded politely and said she remembered. Al continued. He said the evaluation had been wrong, not partially wrong, completely wrong. The assembly had measured physical attributes and ignored something far more important. They had ignored the human spirit. He turned to Danny and asked permission to speak directly. Danny nodded. Al said he had watched the footage of the battle. He said he had seen humans absorb wounds that would have killed soldiers. He said he had seen them fight through pain that should have rendered them unconscious. He said he had seen them refuse to retreat when retreat was the only logical option. He asked Danny to explain. He asked what drove humans to do these things. Danny thought about the question for a long moment before answering. He said humans were born knowing that the universe was trying to kill them. Every day of human existence was a fight for survival. Disease, predators, natural disasters, each other. Humans had spent 200,000 years learning one simple lesson. If you stop fighting, you die. He said other species evolved with advantages that made survival easier. Humans did not. Humans had to earn their survival every single day. That struggle became part of their nature. It became so deeply embedded in human biology that they could not turn it off even if they wanted to. Danny looked at Al with those calm gray eyes. He said pain did not make humans stop. It made them angry. Fear did not make humans run. It made them dangerous. Every instinct that told other species to flee, humans had learned to use as fuel for fighting harder. He said that was what they had discovered at Outpost 17. That was what the assembly was only now beginning to understand. Kate spoke next. She said humans had a saying, "What does not kill us makes us stronger." She said humanity had been getting stronger for a very long time. Every war, every plague, every disaster had forged them into something harder and more resilient. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the toughest, but they might be the most persistent. They might be the hardest to kill. They might be the only species that genuinely did not know how to quit. Al was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of the contempt it had carried at their first meeting. He said the assembly would formally reclassify humanity. They would no longer be a protected species. Kate asked what classification they would receive instead. Al made the clicking sound that served as a sigh. He said the assembly had a classification for species that showed the traits humans had demonstrated: superior persistence, pain tolerance beyond normal biological limits, refusal to accept defeat. It was called Apex Persistence Predator. It had only been applied to 3 other species in the entire history of the assembly. Kate accepted the news with a small nod. She thanked Al for the recognition. The ambassador shook his head slowly. He said thanks were not necessary. He said the assembly had made a mistake that could have cost humanity dearly. Protected species were often ignored when conflicts arose. They were considered acceptable losses. If they had attacked a larger human settlement expecting no resistance, the casualties could have been catastrophic. He said the assembly owed humanity an apology. The meeting ended shortly after. Danny returned to Earth briefly to recover from his wounds. The medical staff at the military hospital were amazed that he was still alive, let alone walking. His injuries should have killed him several times over, but Danny just shrugged and said he had work to do. A reporter asked him about his experience. Danny thought about all the things he could say. He thought about the battle, the fear, the pain. He thought about watching his people die and keep fighting anyway. He said they thought we were weak because we bleed easy and break easy. But being easy to hurt just means we have had a lot of practice getting back up. That is what makes humans dangerous. Not claws, not armor, just the stubborn refusal to stay down. The interview was broadcast across the galaxy. Species who had never heard of humanity before suddenly found themselves watching the small, soft creature speak about survival and persistence, and the will to keep fighting no matter the odds. They stopped raiding any outpost with human personnel. They began requesting human security consultants. Other species started sending delegations to Earth, curious about the beings who had earned a classification that most thought was impossible for creatures so fragile. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, older and more dangerous things heard the stories too. They heard about the small world orbiting an unremarkable yellow sun. They heard about the soft creatures who had driven off the most feared raiders in known space. They heard about the species that did not know how to surrender. And they decided that perhaps humanity was not prey after all. They were survivors. They were fighters. They were persistent predators who had clawed their way to the top of their own food chain and were now reaching for the stars. The galaxy had underestimated them once. It would not make that mistake again.